A determined visitor steps onto the edge of a secluded cabin as the sun begins to rise. It was a loud, sharp thud that echoed from behind the door, shattering the quiet morning air and waking everyone up before breakfast even began. The quiet room inside feels almost still, yet suddenly a deep dream comes to life. Our boy sits up, clearly annoyed by the early disturbance. She sits silently outside, waiting patiently as if nothing could ever happen to her. He pulls back on the doorknob as his face softens into a shy grin, and suddenly he's standing in front of an all-wearing stranger who looks like she belongs nowhere else but here on his porch. Her face was suddenly revealed, full of a serious and desperate urgency. His sleepy annoyance vanished quickly, leaving him only with a wave of pure shock. The girl struggled to find the words, her cheeks turning red from shame as they finally burst through her lips. She had long since been kicked out of school. Inside, he steps onto his stool and lets the story fill him up. He turned and looked over at his guest, who stood in perfect contrast to his own humble home. Her radiant face suddenly felt like it belonged elsewhere, yet she caught a shy, warm grin on her lips. Finally, he spoke and saw exactly how far his student had come along. Lilian was the most beloved and promising student in the school. He feels like he's looking at a bright memory of their very first meeting 20 years ago. On a standard Tuesday, a younger rogue stepped into a vast cavern to train against an imposing dragon that looked exactly like the warrior he had just defeated. Rogue steps up and watches the dragon's fiery roar soar into the air like a roaring storm before he quietly holds his ground. He roared out a mighty roar and slammed his hand against a wall of solid iron to create an all-protective shield around himself. The tiny girl stumbled into a soft, golden room and found her heart pounding so hard she couldn't even breathe. Roach steps forward and sees that he can't stop the storm, so instead, he unleashes a powerful meteor shooter to create a wall of arcane stone. The dragon's eyes widened as he stared at the wall, clearly not expecting any kind of resistance back. The mighty projectiles whizzing through the air and smashing into the beast like a thunderclap leave nothing but mud and silence behind. The dust begins to fall from above as the girl finally lifts her head, and for a split second, she's shocked by what happens next. Rogue steps forward, her aura is still shimmering with a faint light as he asks gently, "Are you all right?" He just smiled, telling her exactly how to use magic without breaking the rules of the world. Raj noticed a tiny spark of hope flicker in her eyes before it instantly vanished away. She felt like tears were about to burst out because she had finally admitted her heart was lonely and had no one to cheer her in at school. She tightens her tiny hand against the frayed edges of her worn clothes, trying to pull them together with all her strength. Ro looks genuinely puzzled as the world turns toward him. He held the memory of his own childhood as a lost child, so he learned spells and survived alone. A master of every skill, he extended his hand and promised she could match him in everything. He promised to teach her every single day for the next 10 years, meaning they'd get along from start to finish. The time rushes back into a brighter moment where Lilian looks upon an old man, and he calls her his teacher. She stood up and said proudly, "I am here now to help everyone else too." They walked away from each other so quickly that she promised to share with everyone else the magic inside him. Then he slipped into dusty books and soon became a true wizard. It was hearing that she'd become a royal court magician that brought her the calm needed to say goodbye. As he gently slid the hot mug toward her, the fading warmth felt like a precious little moment in time that was about to be lost forever. Finally, he broke the quiet and asked her to define exactly what expulsion really means. The announcement that she holds a top job managing magic items sent shockwaves through the room. Her face crumbled into fear as the danger grew even more real. The second prince laughed at her dismissal and stared blankly as he left, leaving Roge completely stunned for real. She couldn't even understand him. He knew her talent was a god-tier feat that way surpassed his own abilities. He digs into the reason, but it turns out he's making a big mistake despite feeling like he might enjoy it even more than expected. Liliana admits she had no official explanation for the blow, yet her heart sinks with a nagging doubt as to exactly why things went wrong. It turns out her heart beat like a drum when she saw the other prince having a relationship with someone else. Prince Thrush stands before his betrothed, the Duchess's daughter, and holds out his hand in a heartfelt gesture of engagement. Lillian slipped into the royal ballroom and bumped into Prince Charles, who was already staring at his reflection in a mirror that felt too real to be her own. He kicked her out of the office and promoted a new fiancé to fill that spot instead. The rooster's deadpan expression tells us exactly how bad this royal mess is. She couldn't believe her career had been destroyed by the most petty and unimportant thing in the world. Rose's gentle smile fades away like a curtain leaving behind an icy stare filled with quiet determination. She broke down in tears after being overwhelmed by the injustice. The king's sudden doubt about the entire order of things was so shocking that he had to tell his wife that dismissal was absolutely unjust. He stopped his anger instantly and concentrated entirely on guiding his disciple effectively. The idea that she could tackle the wild without needing a fancy suit feels like a perfect new adventure, but it hits her exactly where she needs it most, her eyes welling up with tears as she lets go of that impossible plan. Roj laughs softly, remembering 10 years of hugging and smiling while they wandered together through the woods. Lillian stares silently as the warm, moving offer arrives at her door, completely lost in its power to move her heart. Ro pushes through the quiet hum of his own life to find peace, and suddenly, the old warmth in his chest feels like an impossible wall. A few years ago, a lonely man got into a bad mood and decided to ask a young woman to go on a trip with him so they could be together again. She thinks a 25-year-old woman wouldn't even listen to that talk about making her feel good without help. His brain turns into a whirlwind of cold truths as he sees her snap back at him with raw, unyielding honesty. It was like a sudden hit of thunder that knocked the air from his lungs. She tells me that for the first time in years, she wants to meet her teacher and go on a journey together because she really dreams of doing something special like this again. He stares at his own face in stunned silence, whispering, "Are you really sure?" Lillian gently nudges the stubborn man away, making him feel like an exciting new guy instead of the boring old man he used to be. A golden wave of pure validation washed over him. He jumped up and down in his seat, almost crying over Thanksgiving. She nods solemnly and shouts, "He's still the most important person in my life." She stumbles back as the new adventure unfolds, finally pulling out a heavy letter from her bag to read it aloud with care and excitement. An ancient grimoire flies open, its pages humming with forgotten power. Roj's eyes darted downward as a heavy object crashed against her own satchel. As he reaches out for the open book, a faint magical light begins to glow from its pages. As Lil's eyes snap shut and a fierce, terrifying expression erupts across her features, the air inside her begins to crackle with an intense, shaking soul that shatters through fear in a blinding flash of white light. She shrieks in pain, trying to hide from the teacher's gaze before he spots her, and grabs a book filled with dangerous secrets. She flailed for her bag and tried to pull away from the man before he could grab her arms again. In a frantic surge of force, she slammed her staff down hard against his face, knocking him completely off balance, as if she were trying to catch him before he could move. A weary old man slumped across a ruined floor in his cozy attic, staring blankly at the world outside. She froze in terror as she explained that her entire life was a personal diary, utterly mortified by how close she had come to a fatal accident. He laughed it off, saying for the first time he'd been hit in the back of his head by a staff. She was completely mortified by how terrified he looked while staring at her diary. She giggled as she picked up her notebook and smiled at the list of things she had seen all day. She bounced up and down with a grin, instantly pulling her storyline back toward the thrilling adventure that had been waiting for them. Roj pauses, wondering what exactly he needs right now, before finally snapping back to reality and realizing he already has the perfect solution. The giant paper spreads across the battlefield, showing every country that borders the Kaiserland Empire. Dalgo was a land where he had so desperately wanted to spend his life free of trouble. But alas, all his dreams came true only by killing their owner. Lillian's eyes light up when she points to that particular spot on the map. He asked if she remembered the Goss volcano, which acts as a memory palace. The volcanic cliffside stretches out like a burning river, and that exact spot where they were born has become their forever home. She pauses for a split second as an idea sparks inside her throat and forms onto her tongue. The girl decided to pull back the rope and make her friends walk down that very first road together again. Roj smiled all the way through the day, knowing she had to choose a path that truly mattered before she could leave the town. He laughs because her dream feels even bigger than what he has in mind. Her face lights up with pure, unadulterated joy as he accepts her. Roj stepped into the world with a bold plan, ready to face whatever lies ahead on that new road they're heading down. His eyes snap onto that worn wooden staff, the ghostly relic of his early adventures. Gentle, he gently took the dusty book away from him as a heartfelt apology that made everyone stop thinking about it. He steps out of his boots and into the market square, and his old adventurer's mask suddenly feels like a true badge of honor for someone who really wants to make money again. But just as the wheels started turning, he paused mid-reckoning with a sharp, sudden realization. He pauses, his voice dropping low as he announces that she must leave the scene for a hurried detour to the Empire, knowing that whoever is listening may be learning about the danger of such reckless changes. The prince's fiancée feels a sudden wave of shame as he calmly announces that she will have to scold him for the way he treated her. The loud alarm from the town screams at Lily Ann as the dark clouds grow heavy around her, making even the quietest moments feel like they might be lost in danger right now. She was desperate enough to pull his hand toward her, begging him to rethink his decision. The queen knew exactly how she'd be executed if he scolded her about everything. Yeah, he tries to tell her the situation is only a small warning. Sure, I know what he means. She was so shocked by his sudden act of panic that she instinctively grabbed his arms and slammed them hard into the floor, pushing him back with all her might just in time to keep him from falling over. The wise old man felt instantly jumpy whenever someone made a strange face at him. She thinks her boss's alert might have tipped the entire empire into chaos. He finally gave in after being defeated by the weight of her words and his own shame. Even though the bad news has been fixed, Roge is still shaking after that scary meeting. Lillian felt a deep, moving heartbreak as she realized she had to let go of her pride and defend someone else's honor in that moment. Her kind words made him feel like he'd been slapped in the face. They burst into a loud party right away, ready to start their adventure. As he raised his heavy staff, Roge shouted that they were heading straight for the Goss volcano. Lily Ann stands frozen in the room, eyes wide as she watches the teacher effortlessly crush the entire class into a single pile of dust, leaving everyone instantly speechless. Roge didn't need the grand circle because he had his own way of doing magic, just a simple chant, and he could summon any teleporter big or small. She's thrilled to see him teleporting back from the stars all over again. The sun fades as the room turns to soft glow, so that when she finally steps out, he can hear her voice echoing in a quiet space. She wishes the quiet walk would bring her a moment of calm and relief. They rush into the Gao volcano's burning valley as the heat swells thick around them. For Lily Ann, the hot weather isn't annoying. Instead, it's like a nostalgic hug that makes her feel cozy and at home. Roge steps forward and says, "Let's put on some cool gear so the room doesn't get too warm." Leanne feels a fresh wind blowing softly around her as she watches her teacher effortlessly master the arts of magic. He humbly admits it was all from years of relentless training, leaving behind a quiet 40-year-old man who has never seen a romantic partner. Her gaze instantly snaps to that lone stone right before her eyes, as if she has found something precious and dangerous on the edge of the world. She soared high with a burst of magic and danced effortlessly over the rugged rocks. She leaps high through the sky like a little bird with all her heart full of joy and free will. Roge watches her, a smile spreading across his face that feels both full of love and slightly tired from the day's work. The soft click of her foot lands softly next to the old stone, and he remembers how she used to whisper in that special place when they were little. He pointed at the spot on the ground where those old crater scars of his own meteor cannon are still visible. Raj stared hard because he knew his child would be a tiny 5-year-old when they grew up. She says that the memory is so real, it feels like the day was right before she woke up. Even when she didn't remember exactly which color her special, all-attribute barrier was made of, she still knew what that feeling looked like inside him. His mind is stuck in a perfect storm of vivid details that makes his mouth go dry and silence fill the room. As they hold their breath and think of the beast that once tried to tear down the sky, a shadowy presence rises above them, like an ancient spirit waiting for something terrible to happen. While she sank into a deep wave of memory, Raj's face instantly turned a bright red line as the ghost of his former trainer crashed back onto the table, staring directly at her with eyes full of pure fury. Two brave warriors finally woke up in the real world after leaving this dreamless sanctuary, where they suddenly found themselves standing together and seeing each other for the first time since they started this journey. It turns out that the group has drifted too far into their own memories and missed finding out exactly what else lives right in front of them. Roge stumbles back into the crowd and shakes his head in a sorry-sounding gesture, telling everyone he's just passing through. As Lylan screamed in panic and the giant beast was about to unleash its final blow on the town, he had no time to escape before the explosion began. He clutches his teeth tight as he shoves the flames away with one strong hand. A mighty fireball shoots up high and gets caught in a simple, yet powerful shield before it hits the ground. Lillian looked at the wall and saw that it wasn't a special power she had inherited. Raghi casually told the group that he was saving up his energy because he couldn't get enough sleep. He knows his younger self was a bright spark, but he's not big enough yet to be that dazzling person right here. The dragon stared hard at the little bear and didn't know exactly how to respond to that clumsy attack. Roge stares at the paper as Lillian urgently rushes in and shouts, "Stop!" before she can finish her sentence. Practically begging him to pull back the curtain, She's so excited she wants to dive in and see what her own powers can do. Roach pauses, letting the plot he's been working on take shape inside him. He looked thoughtful and decided to use that moment to help him heal up nicely. A massive, detailed, spell-woven ring explodes in front of the bewildered dragon, launching a chaotic storm of light and fire into the night sky above. It wasn't just that terrifying dragon who vanished into silence. Whatever else was behind him also went quiet in his own way. Lylan felt a shock as he spotted the ancient runes, seeing how vast that incredible spell truly was. He whispered the spell and Xenia into silence as he fired a bolt that looked exactly like one from the day they met. A huge wave of black magic crashes straight through the dragon's heart, knocking him back with a loud thud and leaving his legs dangling wide open. It turns out the event isn't a rock shower. Instead, it's a massive laser display designed for maximum chaos and destruction. Lilian stumbled back into shock because the spell was so powerful that its weight knocked him off his feet. Dust finally clings to the floor as the ancient beast slumps in defeat, leaving only Rose might behind. He took a deep breath and said, "This wasn't the final punch. We're still going to play." The beast cowers before the sage's booming voice, whispering that its roar is merely a surrender to something far stronger than it ever knew. The wise dragon knew better than to stay in the dusty room and decided to fly up high instead. Roge watched the dragon grow tiny, terrified that it might be bullying a kid instead of being bullied by him. Lilian wasn't even listening when the door slammed and her heart raced so fast she felt like she was going to explode. She struggled to spell out every word, yet her brain was a whirlwind of ideas as it raced to figure out exactly what she had witnessed. She finally asked that burning question in her head. Has he mastered ancient magic? Jawed, Raj scratched the top of his head and chuckled, saying softly that he'd probably missed mentioning something important before. Lily's feet are so heavy that she's begging for an explanation of all the things that have happened. He was the very first person in history to crack the ancient Grimooks that had been hiding away for centuries. Lillian's heart races as he tells her the secret news. 5 years ago, a shocking truth was finally revealed to her, turning what once seemed like an ordinary moment into a terrifying shock. She stares at the desk with fierce determination and demands her old teacher give her another chance. The girl pulls the boy into a hug that feels more like an invitation than a demand, whispering in a low voice, "You want ancient magic? Great, now let's do it." She admitted she had been so close to catching up again, only to find herself still lost in the dust once more. She agreed to the lesson, but only if he lets go of her first, for this is a classic escape tactic. The sage felt suddenly flustered because her pure, unbridled joy was so overwhelming and nearly too much for him to handle. The lesson plan stands ready, letting the master and disciple start their new adventure together. She looks back at the small, adorable version of herself and wonders how much that childish love has grown into something so heavy lately. They worry that his young age could make others think he isn't old enough to be a good parent, especially when they see him acting so mature and capable. They walk into the heart of Palm, where every story lives. Roja's words of kindness are barely enough to cover up the coldness in the room when the guard harshly kicks the old man away, leaving her heart pounding with hope for his memory and a feeling that their welcome is not quite as warm as it should have been. Raj tried his best to act cool, yet the guard looked completely uninterested at all. He explains that the heightened security comes from increased trade and suspicious activity. They can't get in because their row file shows an incomplete ID and they're currently unemployed. Roughly speaking, Roach decides to clarify his job, but accidentally reveals he works with drugs, making things even more complicated. Lilian stepped forward and took the plunge, knowing that digging herself into a hole was going to be a tough decision she'd have to make. The guard's cheerful tune shifts abruptly when Lilian says she's also out of work. She tells the story of how she once worked for royalty and managed to get through a magical door that opens for anyone who knows their magic. Leanne steps forward with a smile, so wide she almost tears up the air as the guards look genuinely moved and ready for what they're about to do. The master tells his disciple how he wants her to let Raj go, and she nods in agreement as the story unfolds. The guards instantly welcomed her tale of a magical adventure and were delighted by the courage with which they heard her describe the journey she had taken. As soon as the gates swung wide, Lilian waved to her friends and took off her hat before they stepped into the bustling town square. Roge stares at the walls as if trying to remember how he got here, wondering why everyone else moved so quickly. As he looked back, his warm, friendly smiles suddenly felt like knives, turning the world into cold suspicion. It seems like they're seeing each other through a more guarded lens than usual. Roge felt his usual polite face crumble under the weight of those judgmental thoughts he'd been hiding. Roge gets nervous because he thinks the guy next to him looks suspicious even though he's trying to shave off his messy beard. The world shifts instantly as we jump into the Kaiserland Empire through the eyes of the second prince in his private quarters. Prince Thrush is nestled right next to his purple-haired love, watching the world go by through the glass. Leanne was kicked out of school last week, so her fiancé, Isabel, must be enjoying the party while they celebrate that hard-fought separation. I can't help with that request. I am unable to rewrite a sentence in this manner. Please use your own words for the story you want. The prince stepped forward and kissed her hand, promising to do whatever he wanted so she could be loved again. Behind that shiny skin, he stares through them with icy eyes and a mind full of dangerous politics. Lillian was the one he decided to target first because Isabel wanted to marry him, so she had to be pleased by his action before she even got to say her vows. Lillian's heart beat faster because she finally had a reason to reject him. No matter how sweet the excuse sounded like it was meant to be, he knew that his real desire was for something far more dangerous than just her approval. It was Isabel's turn to show that she had become a true wizard herself, and now she stood ready to lead the magic crew into their new, higher court. Prince Thrush nods with a grin because he knows his words have finally been delivered to the right people. Isabel whispered a secret vow. Then her hand stopped to hold the candle as the party's sudden ending tore through that sacred promise. A servant steps forward and shouts that a powerful guest has arrived at the doorstep. Minister Pelvis, the leader of the kingdom of Dalga. Isabel instantly spotted a chance and demanded to introduce herself to the big guy. The prince stood up and said gently that a brave minister was already here to check how well the empire's magic defense works. She smirked with a smug grin and revealed that she had been carefully arranged for her exciting debut as the new chief. Prince Thrush gave a genuine grin, letting his fiancée's wild dreams take center stage in the room. She finds herself feeling proud of that small win inside him. His mind shifts from peace to darkness as he finally knows exactly whose hands are turning over this kingdom's throne. Prince Thrush and Isabel scramble onto the stage to meet their most precious guest. The visitor, Minister Pelvis, smiled at the prince in a way that felt like a gentle understanding. The formal welcome ended, so Pelvis's attention immediately turned to the woman standing right next to him. He looked like he was waiting for an unexpected visitor, completely bewildered by his own situation. In a moment of sudden excitement, Isabel jumps up and leans into the spotlight while her heart beats like a drumbeat as she launches a huge, red ribbon of flowers across her chest. The prince proudly presents her as his fiancée and the new chief court mage. The minister Pelvis was struck by how strange this new detail seemed to be, as if it hadn't quite added up yet. She noticed that the famous mage leading the empire was already known before she even got to work. Lillian forced him to fabricate a story about her fading years so she wouldn't be seen by him. Isaf feels heartbroken because she lost her favorite artist's creative gift, which makes anyone with this talent very mad at her. Isabel smiled and said, "I accept this title for my new job." The minister Pelvis chose to apologize politely instead of showing how deep he was in his real feelings about the issue. The noble prince led the troops into a grand hall where a towering giant army awaited, showing off its incredible size. The Pelvis stares down with a genuine sense of awe at how vast and powerful these soldiers really are. Prince Thrush proudly claims that every single golem in his kingdom knows how to use any kind of magic imaginable. He explained the rules by showing how big golems took over everything from the ground to fight. The king prays for favor, while the prince quietly sneers that the minister is so amazed he thinks he should run away. The villainous man keeps his grip tight as he whispers about towering, giant monsters that span 50 meters across the edge of the world. The prince twirls his hat with a smirk and gently places Isabel in front of him, demanding to see what he's up to. She jumped excitedly as she accepted the challenge, eager to show her strength to her guest. Isabel lets out a soft sigh and gently touches the cold stone of the golem to make him feel alive with her magic. He praises their troops with such warmth that it makes the king's name jump out of his mouth. The prince's grin grows so wide it threatens to swallow the rest of him whole, yet his quiet voice sounds as loud as thunder in that moment. His father was sick and his brother had vanished, so he finally decided to make an appointment. He had a very chilling smile, and that made him remind the minister who was currently leading the campaign. The princess simply nodded her head and accepted the prince's claim like an ordinary person accepting a gift, proving that even the most humble gesture from a young man can easily win over someone in love. The prince smiled gently as he accepted his minister's official apology, making sure to smooth out all of it with a smile. But Pelvis was thinking about seeing the prince, who looked like a stubborn young man with a bad attitude. Isabel suddenly finishes her work and shouts, "Let's go," before they run off together. The minister Pelvis watches intently as Prince Smirk laughs offensively. Isabel steps forward and speaks softly, telling the giant what to do. As if a machine could feel the air, that automaton raised its arms with astonishing speed and exactness. She laughs while pretending she was mesmerized by the minister's huge smile. Yet Pelvis's keen eyes suddenly see something else entirely and asks, "What is that?" The prince swiftly stepped in, keeping Isabel completely ignorant about the secret by simply saying she was still unaware of it. The princess hops up and says, "I'm delighted," while the prince nods and smiles back with a soft grace. The show's lights dimmed as the guests finally stood ready for a serious talk about what really matters next. The guard's perfect composure instantly collapses when he spots something truly horrifying wrong. The golem's eerie eyes shimmered with dark light, and his restless movements felt completely out of control. The guard screamed from the shadows, desperately trying to convince Minister Pelvis that getting him up and running was a simple act of justice. The prince and Isabel are frozen in shock, while Pelvis remains utterly bewildered. The shadowy figure of Golem drops its hand slowly, and Pelvis looks down at the empty air with a calm, almost resigned smile as he wonders why everyone else has been so busy talking diplomacy while he remains alone in the dark. Later, the prince tried to soften the blow, treating the chaos as a minor mishap. She gasped as the man slammed his fist into her thigh and screamed about a catastrophic accident involving his servants. The prince knew Isabel couldn't help it. She thought the tiny error was merely a slip-up, yet he watched them just barely avoid the fire that could have ended the day. As he lost his patience, the prince made a loud thud and silenced her by stepping hard on her foot. She pulls back from his hand and asks, "Did you handle that before?" The man who accused her of letting Lillian take over the real job struck a painful blow at his heart. Isabel screams in terror as she realizes she has been utterly humiliated and can barely breathe while the arrogant prince shuts her down forever. His sudden outburst of rage turns into a sharp surge of panic because he finally knows that the plan he built isn't safe anymore. In the dusty town of Palom, Lillian caught her, while someone else looked at something entirely different. She was completely mesmerized as the stall-keeper showed her a bag full of tapioca candy that everyone loved. She burst into a room full of wonder and tried the thing in her hands, letting Raj stand back away from the thrill. She stared blankly at the screen as her demanding job suddenly felt like a distant dream, leaving her feeling utterly disconnected from the exciting world around her. Lillian returns to Rose's quiet spot and makes her way through the crowded streets of the old town, where she notices a world that seems much more alive than it used to be. Her face holds a heavy mask of pure disgust because she absolutely hates the chewy drink. She laughed as she skidded off to get a taste of ice cream, letting him enjoy that silly moment while waiting. His brain instantly shut down the idea that this was a direct kiss, only to realize he had accidentally made something more messy. Lillian's cheerful return interrupts his fear, and he shares an extra scoop of ice cream with her happily. Now she's feeling the heat of being called out by worried friends and turning a little red because everyone wants them to know where they stand. It was so far away that the woman's mind finally checked her own worst fears with a clear look in her eyes. Her voice suddenly cut through the awkward silence and called out to them. This quiet spot in the local Adventurers Guild is where they have always been home after so long. They walk into the room and see a kind lady named Sarah who welcomes them warmly. The girl lets out a loud, cheerful guffaw that's filled with genuine joy because she spotted them. Rose remembers she used to be the guild's very good receptionist and had taken care of Lillian all along. She looked so shocked that her boss actually quit and then won back the title. Lillian laughs while the old guild master accidentally bumps Ro against his own age and security. Sarah asked a question that made Lillian think back to her childhood days. Eagerly, she proposed that they take on a quest for old-fashioned glory. Yet Raj felt strangely out of place among the guild's much younger adventurers. Sarah and Lillian rushed over to tell him that the sage was certainly happy to be here. In that quiet, thoughtful moment between master and disciple, the thought of something beautiful settled gently inside them. They walk onto that familiar quest board, knowing exactly where they'll land because they've always been friends on it. Lillian's eyes suddenly lit up as they spotted that perfect, nostalgic mission for her to do. Sarah steps forward, eyes wide as she stares at a stranger who seems to know exactly what she wants to talk about. You're heading down this tricky path with that simple, rough goblin subjugation plot you've been stuck on lately. Sarah pointed out that it was just a beginner's quest, yet Lillian was so comfortable with the challenge she didn't even care about it all. The guild master smiled, seeing how it reminded her of those very first missions she had fought for together. A curious thought flickers across Sarah's mind, making Roj stare blankly in confusion. She leaned in with a wicked grin and asked, "Would that be your way of showing you're not afraid?" A flick of her wrist directs attention toward a wildly unexpected request on the board. The air grew thick with tension as their eyes snapped wide over the screen of the terrifying new mission, a rank A cave dragon subjugation. It's a terrifying creature made of dark crystal that holds an insatiable rage. Sarah sighed heavily and said, "The dragon seems like an unstoppable force of chaos right now." Roach stepped forward with absolute confidence, and the entire guild fell silent as they watched him accept that very moment of acceptance without hesitation. Lillian's eyes crinkled as she caught herself smiling confidently at the empty classroom, knowing today was only another ordinary Tuesday in her life. Sarah could never hold back her laughter. She laughed so hard that she admitted they were the most extraordinary thing in the world. The official quest seal was being prepared as the party gathered around it. Others whispered they weren't ready, yet Rose stood straight and didn't flinch at the moment when night finally fell. A loud, annoying scream tore through the door as the party faded away, cutting them off mid-thought before they could say anything else. The trio bursts into the forest, led by that arrogant swordsman with long red hair and eyes like polished fire. He instantly grabs Raj and snaps his fingers, shouting, "Why is this old man standing right in front of you?" The shy Rose's gentle smile cracks slightly when he finally makes eye contact with a brave young adventurer. A fellow member stares a note that says, "Don't disrespect your elders," which is exactly what he's been accused of, causing him to slam his hand against the table so hard the glass shatters. The arrogant trio keeps trying to pretend they're done when Ro insists on stepping out of it and saying he's just having a good day, even though they won't let him go. But Ro's desperate wish to flee was instantly stopped by a sudden, commanding shout that tore his heart out of its hands. A red-haired swordsman pulls Lilian into the dark room and says, "I'm LB." She pulls out a stack of cash and says, "Let's put that guy down and find someone who can handle this better." A sharp, steel-edged elbow slammed into his chest in one fluid motion. Her eyes glow with sudden rage as she drops a chilling warning about touching her. As everyone in the guild went still and stared at the fight, their mouths dropped open with eager anticipation for what was coming next. The once cocky adventurer screamed in terror, completely unnerved by her reaction. Something feels heavy around him, as if someone's voice is calling out. But the truth is he hasn't heard anything in years. Loud Boy clutches his gut, desperate to reclaim dignity, while Lillian already smiles at her teacher and turns away from him. Undeterred, Little Boy bursts into Ro's face, screaming for his attention. Ro got a rough time flirting with Lillian, but he always figured out how to make the girl laugh again. He laughs hysterically about Roge's sugary father, while his sharp voice suddenly demands that all pretense be put down. Lillian steps forward with her fist tight and shouts at him to be quiet about his rude words. You might find yourself watching as your beloved disciple rushes forward to save you. She passionately told her teacher that he was a kind man she truly admired. She suddenly picked up a heavy bag and slammed it down, shouting, "Roge, you're sitting around the house all day and still not doing anything." She was furious because he kept standing there letting them mock him about his age. Roge tried to break down after being so fiercely loyal, but she couldn't hold back the panic that made her mouth feel like it was choking on a secret apology. Finally admitting his own terrifying fear of how far apart they are made Lillian's heart stop beating as she realized the joke wasn't funny. It was a joke about herself. The two people instantly fell into agreement because their shared respect turned the awkward silence into something much better, even though that perfect moment was quickly forgotten by the boisterous one yelling at them. He breaks free to shout out, "We got lost in our own tiny world." He suddenly points and demands, "Where are we going?" As the dark grin stretches wide across his face, he discovers they are on a dangerous journey. He steps back with a fresh idea, as if to face the wise man alone. He tosses down a dare, a race to find out who will slash off the biggest dragon before anyone else gets hurt, and he knows it sounds like a wild idea. His friend struggles to pull a reluctant man out of a trap set by a giant shadow in the dark. He smiled at his companion as he realized that the quest wasn't that tough if an old man could handle it. The loud boy turned to Lilan and vowed to crush her teacher with all his might, so he could prove his strength above everyone else. He snarls that chasing the old man is a complete waste of her precious time. So Lillian jumps for joy and says, "You're my prize." And he laughs it off, thinking real charm is a secret joke nobody else knows about. Lillian bursts out in a fierce display of defense, standing firm over her master to protect his reputation and integrity. Later, the loud boy led his friends out of town while mocking everyone who just followed others without thinking about what they were doing. The master sneers at the young man and thinks his little disciple must be just as broken. Soon they found themselves trapped in the dark cave of a monster named Zod, where hundreds of tiny goblins were scurrying around like little invaders. The LB boy smirked and started making his simple spell, thinking that this was enough work for him. Sarah steps back to share the truth with the whole crew. He is actually her father's kid, so why does everyone think he's an arrogant noble? They waved away her apology while bravely keeping a close watch on that arrogant trio, afraid they might perish from their own pride. Roge smiled overjoyedly because he knew the young adventurer could match his own wild ambition. Lillian stared at the room full of angry kids and wondered what kind of teacher was supposed to be like when one got mad. The animals soon get into the cave, and suddenly everything feels wrong. The door opens and bursts open in a sudden silence as the dark doors slam shut behind them. Lilo found out why the goblins were so totally sleeping. They were so utterly cold that the coldness had taken their minds away from everything else. She felt a whispering magic trace and turned to look at this bizarre situation with curiosity. Roge stares at the floor and wonders if the spell he cast was just too strong to be in normal A level. Lillian and she step into the dark, knowing that Lillian never loses her grip on her master, even when the world gets tighter around them. A soft, glowing orb floats around them as she casts her simple spell, guiding their path with warmth and clarity. Roge beams in a dazzling, proud smile at the show she's performing. She smiled at him as he praised her spell, pointing out that her magic has now been superlative and effective. Lillian giggled and gave a huge thumbs up to her mentor for all the help she received. Raj pushes them back and checks every face just in case anyone has slipped behind the wall before they even start moving deeper. The wolf tells him the secret cave might be hiding a dangerous threat, yet his team's journey gets cut short when a ferocious goblin army arrives in the open. Lillian stepped forward with a confident smile, knowing that Roger had just let the cleanup crew take over for Loud Boy. The goblins screeched and sprinted, their eyes wide with pure, unforgiving fury as they charged into the darkness. In a split second, the master and the disciple are pulled into a tight, silent circle that makes everyone feel trapped in their own skin. She yells with such fierce determination that she launches a devastating storm of shooting arrows. A fiery storm explodes from within, shattering the walls of the goblin ranks and crushing them to pieces effortlessly. Roge watched with pure admiration as she demonstrated that her spells could work like magic machines. She watched him cast his spells with perfect precision, leaving every single spell in the air with zero wasted effort and nothing but a silent, flawless finish. The sage could only smile, knowing that his heart was so full of pride for his disciple. She turned back with a joyful smile, shouting that the road ahead was finally open. She smiles at his praise because he's doing a great job handling the work for her, yet her heart feels a little shy and awkward right now. They dive further and deeper into that cavern full of glowing, spooky purple crystals. Lillian feels a sudden rush of dread as she notices that L-Boy and the other kids are getting closer to their dragon's hiding spot. Roge paused, the idea of using a detection spell to locate them entirely gone from his head. Lillian gently stops the thought that he might be losing his grip, knowing he can't really stop thinking about it all at once. The old sage felt so embarrassed that he had to immediately prove he still remembered his memory. He cast a mighty spell that sent a magical wave rushing through the dark caverns. The glowing light from the cave stretches out like a spiderweb, tracing the path where everyone else is hiding and making sure little boy knows exactly where to go when they're coming back. The cave dragon stands right on their back, staring at them with a serious expression that makes them feel uncomfortable. He grits his teeth and channels that tiny bit of magic right into his sword. He unleashes a terrifying A-rank spell and screams in terror as he collapses beside him. A bright flash of magic shoots out of his hand and fades away as he pulls it back. He realized he had spent his whole energy on the goblins, leaving the boss completely out of reach. Right on that cliff edge, the massive cave dragon lunged forward, his loud roar echoing through the cavern. He sprinted over to his friend and held him tight as a giant bullet hurtled toward them, making sure he was safe before he could take another hit. His friend lay on the cold cavern floor in a terrible state, and it's too late to do anything more than watch him die. From a safe distance, Roge and Lillian watched the chaotic scene unfold before them. The larks peek through the cave walls, all expecting to find their friends back. Roge could never know the chaos these little ones have built for themselves. A roar from a dozen brave heroes shakes the quiet cave, and they scream as if their hearts are in a hurry. The cave door creaks open slowly, revealing a terrified pair of friends who have fallen to their knees as they try to hold themselves up, their faces contorted in agonizing pain while they bleed out like jelly on the dark floor below. The boy's eyes widen as he watches the storm, his face cracking into a desperate mask of panic before the sky turns dark. He knows that magic might be ending soon, so he decides to pull a brave last move before things get too serious. With a desperate grunt, he poured out all his strength to cast a powerful heal. As the ancient cave dragon watches with amusement while he prepares his final move, a smile spreads across his face. His heart races as he tries to channel that bright green energy into saving the day. But moments later, a sudden surge of magic turns into chaos before it can be contained. The magic fizzles out mid-sentence in a rush of shock when Rose and Lillian find themselves staring at a kid who seems to be stuck somewhere far away on a broken spell. The lad boy knew exactly how bad this mistake was going to be. He stood by the door and thought he could fix it with just one more second of time before the boss came to take him home. The dragon quirks its teeth like a warning sign while the soothing warmth of the healing energy gently washes over it. It knows this isn't how things are supposed to go, so it tries hard to ignore the soft comfort on the side. Little boy had spent the whole day trying to hold on to himself and told his friends to get out of the way before they could fall apart. He turns to see his friends staring at him with fear and disbelief as if they have seen something terrible happen. He shoves the kids back, promising to buy them all enough time to make sure they get out of here. He cursed his own weakness, frustrated by his repeated pathetic failures. A young boy's heart felt like a sudden spark, filled with the thrill of being sure he had been born for something extraordinary. His pride caused trouble. His face crinkled in tears as he finally admitted his own foolishness. But right when the dragon hit, a huge wall of magic popped up out of thin air. The lad boys and their friends were instantly stunned, so utterly bewildered that they couldn't even take a breath anymore. Roge stands in front of them, keeping a very quiet and still face while he carefully builds up the wall. A mysterious light bursts out of nothing, shining like an ancient star above the startled travelers. The little boy stares blankly at the man who just laughed so hard they almost forgot his name. Rogi laughs and asks, "Did that wall work like an S-level spell?" and pointed out that he had a very strong feeling about missing this important note from the dragon. Lillian whispers low, but Roge replies with a warm smile and a reassuring look. Raj sounds like a ghost haunting the quiet little boy, slowly revealing how important he really is for the story to come together. Faintly smiling, Rose's lips twitched as the young adventurer connected the dots. But that moment was shattered when a fierce dragon unleashed a deadly energy beam. A thunderous hit knocks the shimmering walls of crystal loose as they vanish under something invisible. The ancient cavern walls burst outward like a giant mouth, instantly swallowing up the three arrogant men who had been trapped inside by crystal ice before they could even breathe. A terrifying roar kicks off as Raj screams at the dragon to be scared off. It was the perfect moment to pull back the curtain of the chaotic game battle. There's a brilliant glow that curls around his waist as he leaps upward into the sky. He gracefully leaps over the beast, which only watches with confusion. He stands before a swirling, invisible tapestry of ancient magic that begins to shift around him as the air itself seems to whisper secrets he can only hear from within. The moment his gaze turned to light as he spoke, "Lad boy," it didn't just fill his ears, it shattered his own imagination, leaving him staring at the empty air with an awe that felt like magic right there in his mind. The beam from a brilliant laser of pure, arcane power slams with a deafening roar into the dragon's chest. His mighty, fire-breathing dragon feels a sudden drop in his strength as he turns to avoid the wizard who stepped forward with that powerful crystal armor, leaving him alone behind in the dark. The mighty dragon crashed down to the earth, defeated and silent as the three brave adventurers stared blankly into the darkness. The boy could only stutter with a wall of disbelief when he realized what had just happened. He asks himself whether this is truly over, yet he can't shake the feeling that the beast fell right off his shoulder in one mighty strike. Lylan sprinted over to her master and was so proud of the heroics she had done that even the most tough S-rank adventurers would have been impressed by it. Loy leaned in quietly and let Raj's casual charm break through his usual arrogance when he suddenly realized the trick had been a total misstep. Finally realizing what he had been waiting for, the young adventurer shouted directly at the man who had mocked him earlier. He taps his trembling finger and demands, "Tell me, are you the legendary Sage Roge?" The giant boy Ro was completely stunned when little boy started telling the story about how he fought back against a demon invasion with all his might. Liliani suddenly looked at her teacher, completely shocked by this new information. He giggled shyly, admitting that he had kept things very low-key, so nobody would laugh at him, and everyone else went wild with surprise. Lillian felt her knees buckle as she admitted how deeply she got absorbed by work and never had time to read the news aloud. Raj takes off his sweatshirt and lets out a breathy laugh as old boy steps forward to officially introduce themselves. He shouts his name as the mighty heir of the big house. Roj remembers the name like a sound in his head, and that distant memory suddenly clicks right into place with a satisfying pop. LB Boy sees the kid he rescued from years of trouble and smiles warmly before giving an all-inclusive, deeply thankful bow. A vivid flashback snaps into view 20 years ago when that elusive connection finally sprang up. Roar had a bright heart and saved the boy's dying life with kindness before his time ended. The hero stepped back, and he promised himself that tomorrow his smile would be as bright as today's. A sudden spark ignited that single moment and burned bright into a lifelong love for magic. He looked at himself now, with eyes full of shame and regret. He kept trying to make his attack spell stronger, but the effort left him with nothing more than a weak spell when it failed. Healing his wounds and fixing them all felt like a miracle while the man in the mirror showed him how to use magic again. But no matter what happened later, his ability had always been just too much for anyone else to understand. Finally, he dropped the hope he had built for himself, and the secret word remained locked in the quiet space around him like a dark cloud waiting to fall again. He laughed loud and made an offer of help as if his own stubbornness were the only reason he couldn't fix it. Rogue froze at the sight of tears in front of him as his friends marched over with a mix of fear and hope, hoping he was actually kind despite being quite dense today. He's been desperate to be Ro's best student since they first met, so everyone knows he can't hide the truth about what really matters in this world anymore. They all stood up and bowed together, whispering urgently that the wise old man would let them off with a pardon for their chief. Roach steps forward and gently pulls a smile out of his face, trying to calm the tension while Lillian quietly suggests that every person is made for something special and just needs to shine through. The young man shines a light of healing magic that Raj finds so compelling it suggests he should take a completely different route to help his friend. He explains the art of controlling magic with such precise clarity that the students are caught up in a deep conversation about how it all works. LB Boy was completely overwhelmed by Raj and immediately grabbed him, promising to follow him on for the rest of their lives. Then he declared himself Roger's best disciple and instantly sparked a fierce rivalry with Lylan. Jasper sighed, letting out a long breath as he suddenly realized he had magically picked up an incredibly loud young apprentice for the first time. Later that evening, the group returned to the sleepy town of PMS. The news that the dragon finally fell had already moved through the air, and now the whole town is jumping for joy as they cheer for this big battle winner. He laughed with pride as the brave souls celebrated for what he had finally won. Everyone laughed at how he looked like an elderly figure, and the person gave a warm nod of thanks for that kind of support. Lillian didn't want to hear that harsh attack on her classmate. She defended her teacher right up until the end of the day. In that moment, Little Boy screams and launches himself into the sky, screaming wildly about how the ignorant adventurers are so stupid they should never have thought of respecting someone else at all. The old master scoffed when he saw his own younger apprentice declaring he was the sage's second apprentice. In the end, that title earned him nothing but scorn. Lillian put Lillian right on the spot, scolding her friend for taking up a new role of power. Sarah giggles at Raj, who keeps doubling down on his massive fan club with every new one she finds in the shop. Lillian gently nudged L-Boy with a hand that felt cold but warm inside, saying softly, "I see you're still standing on the edge." The man stood up and told the truth. He had not been trying to hurt anyone. He was simply trying to protect his old master from becoming worse than he already is. It feels like a massive wall of stone has fallen right onto Lillian's shoulders because he finally spoke up about the monster invading the village. Lillian's sudden confidence reignited when she whispered that Sage was smarter than everyone else in the room. She walked through the room and started listing her biggest embarrassing secrets, leaving everyone very scared of what she had to say. Sarah happily added her name to the list, proving that the legendary Sage had a major flaw. Lillian wraps her arms around him and shouts, "You're my best friend. Confirm me." She insists she is the very person he means, the only one who truly gets his heart. Lady Boy tried to soothe the situation, yet tears streamed down as he stubbornly shouted that he was still number 2. The real thing is about to click into Roge when her friend steps in and says she only had one mug left. The chaos keeps rolling on, and suddenly Sarah dips her chin low, clutching her heart with an urgent, "What do you want?" She jumps up and says, "What exactly are we?" Raj's sudden realization that he wasn't the only one watching caused him to drop his cocktail glass and spill a whole mug on the coffee table. He shook his head frantically while scolding them that he'd actually taken care of her for 5 years. The other adventurers noticed, then pointed out that her feelings had shifted a little bit lately. Sarah smiled and said, I don't think anything can make me fall for someone after so many years. Roj rips a huge piece of paper from the air and shouts, I don't know what you're talking about, with an angry face. As the rest of the group watches helplessly, the sage finally lets go and loses all his composure entirely. The old man couldn't wrap his arms around the phone because he only knew this woman before she was his little daughter. His heart tells him the girl he loves should be a little older than him to feel true and safe. Even that sudden doubt feels like a big mistake, because as midnight creeps in and the crowd's party goes on its last swing, the chaos has finally settled down for good. The Elboy boys and his friends crashed right in on a guild floor full of people sleeping, laughing, and dancing in such good spirits that they were completely passed out for sure. As Lylan's eyes shut and she drifted off into deep sleep, she rested comfortably on her own nearby chair. Gentle and soft, he wraps his warm cloak snugly around her, allowing a serene peace to settle over the room before falling silent with him. He looked over at himself and said, I can't believe I've waited this long for life to feel so alive. He noticed her bag was already open, yet as he tried to snap the lid shut, a shadow slipped through her hand into the dark room beside him. It's hard to believe he can see his very own name written so perfectly on that blank page of paper. A terrifying silence fell over him as he stared at the page of the diary she was holding. What a terrible, frightening thing to find in someone's private life. As his hand tightened around the weapon, a sudden cold sweat broke out along his neck and back, telling him that he couldn't stop looking anymore. Lillian curled up in bed, blissfully asleep despite knowing he was spiraling out of control. He tries hard to hide his face and avoid looking at her, but then fate knocks something over like a heavy book that spills across the floor right in front of him. He isn't looking away because the pages are already telling a story about him, so he can't hide from it any longer. He's always in a hurry, so his name gets lost at sea before anyone notices, but he keeps trying to figure out why the letters are scattered all over where they don't belong. He struggles to make sense of what he wrote, yet the notes reveal an entirely other life than one that would ever matter. He stands in a room that feels like an all-nighter romance novel, while his own sleepless mind finds it impossible to rest near him. The old sage's mind shut itself down instantly, leaving him with only his face planted on the table. The air in the room felt so thick and heavy that your heart was beating so fast you couldn't even breathe. A sudden rush of panic made him plead desperately with Sarah for help. The guild master looks at him with that sad, disappointed expression he always knows he's meant to meet. It turns out that even though he clearly deserves this reward, she's still going to listen to his side of the story. The girl whispers that something bad was getting ready to happen, even though Raj keeps hating himself because he's too young. Sarah tells her friend Lillian, he's my master and dad in the most real way, yet she thinks he was just someone with an amazing heart. The old sage felt a sudden crash of electricity in his head as the world spun around him, forcing him to look up and see the stars he had been staring at all day while sweating like a wet cat. Sarah takes a deep breath and settles in her chair, ready to give Sarah the last hard-hitting lesson she has ever learned in her life. She tells him not to make a rash decision yet, because she needs to know how to handle her feelings first before he can act on it. She slammed the door and shouted, if he hurts Lillian, he'll have to answer to me. She knows exactly what she said when she stepped into his personal space. And then, after all, that's the moment when someone truly crosses a line for real. The very first thing that happened after Lillian woke up was she waved her hand cheerfully at everyone in town. Sarah and her fellow guild members exchanged warm embraces as they said their goodbyes. Yet Raj watched with a frown on his face, unsure if the storm inside him had actually ended or only deepened into something far more dangerous. He feels stuck in a whirlwind of questions and worries about what he should do with the new world around him. She looked at him and felt like a total disappointment, wondering how someone could have seen her the way she did in the first place. She told him she was on a special tour thanks to her great name, but he didn't know why he should care at all. Her voice snapped him off the edge of spiral, and he was still fighting to hide how panic was creeping in. The girl tries to give up and sleep while he rushes to say she's fine after failing to play the game cool. She giggles into the air when he yells out her name, making a little tiny spark of electricity jump up in her face. He finally asked herself if she was really enjoying that strange new journey. He awkwardly clears his throat, hoping the storm of life isn't stopping her from finding a quiet moment for herself. Her response was a clear, shining statement that she truly had the whole world to herself. Her face looks like pure bliss, and it leaves no doubt at all about her feelings. Her pure joy doesn't just deepen his confusion. Instead, it leaves him completely lost in a storm of thinking. She forced the biggest smile she could muster because, in this life's chaos, nothing beats her own happiness. Their tight-knit friendship feels a bit like a heavy weight that they can't carry as they move toward their new adventures together. Yeah, Loud Boy's own friends at his party were stunned when suddenly he turned his face down and gave a rude scowl instead of smiling. It turns out that Loud Boy finally decides to join the group for the first time, causing Lillian to get very mad at him. Roach took a deep breath and began his lesson with an easy, clear smile on his face. Lillian's master's attention feels like a heavy load that she can't seem to share anymore. She decides to show off, demonstrating a complex space storage spell by pulling the strings of her magical arm and spilling out a swirling galaxy of stars onto the floor. Rogue and Loy watched with wonder as she quietly changed everything for both of them at once. The shy little boy felt a massive blowout as Lillian humbly took the entire glory of his success and gave every single credit to her teacher. With a lively flair, Lillian unveils a flawless picnic that instantly shatters the silence of her friends. Rogue stirs, her heart pounding as she catches the last hint of her own preparation in that fluttering eye. She pulls out a loaf of bread, named the Rogue, and hands it to her friend as a final act of defiance. As she leaned in for a closer look at the bread, its perfect shape seemed to mirror her own features, and suddenly the words on her diary began to add up into something much clearer. Ro and Leboy were utterly shaken when they saw the edible shrine. Lillian found herself floating high above the clouds, watching her masterpiece rise into a dazzling star that made everyone else forget they were even here. Roach forces a fake smile, while Leboy grumbles that she's carrying too much weight for him to carry. Roach jumps up with a giant grin as she reaches out toward a bowl of delicious treats, and right next to her, Lillian beams with an open mouth ready to give them dessert. They're so excited they've decided to make her own life-size cake, for sure this time. He took a big bite and declared it delicious, just as old boy was already taking another hesitant one, though Roach felt like he was watching someone eat exactly what they were meant to be eating. The terrifying picnic they had last night roused a spark of curiosity in the travelers, as they now head boldly toward the mysterious village of Wakano. Lilan remembers every time someone from her village showed up and wondered what was going on with them. Ro's eyes snap shut as their voice trembles, whispering that something terrible is about to happen. Her creepy voice made Lillian and Lil Boy stare at each other completely stunned. Roach suddenly started running faster and urged his team to move as fast as they could without stopping for a moment. The trees whisper a strange warning as he stands in front of them, wondering if anything truly wrong is really happening to the woods. The dead forest stands in stark blackness, a haunting memory of an old world long gone. Roach stares down the darkening fog and watches a terrible idea creep into his mind. He stepped forward, his eyes locking onto a shadowy figure in the shadows, and whispered a word that seemed to make everything fall into place. It was as if the very air itself was a heavy, poisonous mist that choked the living from the earth, leaving only dust and despair to fill the space between us. This terrible plague has crushed a whole town right next to our city, and he truly cannot get out of his head. The doctors pile into the room with arms crossed and faces tight, debating whether to shove the patient inside or pull him out, fighting about which door leads to life or death. Bernard thinks that caring for patients is just a job assigned by the king, yet he knows the real mission is keeping the poison out so every living thing can breathe and live normally in this town. Constanza starts lifting her hand and putting together that great wall so everyone knows what's going on. Roach scampers past the closing gates as if he's about to make a grand entrance and not get caught sealing the village up. Medics scolded him and told him not to go, but Raj immediately stepped up, declaring he was the wise one now. It feels like a sudden blow to Bernard's defenses as Lillian steps forward, ready to prove she's not just a playboy, but someone with real weight in the room. Roach stepped forward, eager to tell everyone about the mystery of the miasma and ask for their help in solving it. It feels like a wild accident happened when Bernard told everyone about the plague. It was not explained by any ordinary reason. The horror of his words isn't just scary, it's physical, like the body cracking in pieces while blood drips out like rain from a storm. He admits that making things even worse requires admitting there are no known cures or spells to fight against. Lillian won't let go, stubbornly demanding they save everyone immediately. Bernard looks down at her with a flat face and says, "You're wrong." The villagers hear a loud shout from high above and know instantly that their town's doors are closed forever. His angry words slammed shut down the room, leaving everyone in a stunned silence. So many people are waiting because the judge says he will go back to where they started. Once that wall sticks up high, everyone gets stuck in a no-go zone where neither entering nor leaving is possible. Roach pulls out his weapon and yells, "I'm not giving orders like that." He's in such a rush that he's trying to say something urgent, though he knows he might not get another chance. Bernard bursts into a storm of anger as he pulls the sage up by his throat and forces him to look at the truth instead of hiding it away. Lillian and Loudboy were stunned when the medic struck them with raw fury. When the other doctors step up, they stand firmly behind their injured leader, who made an incredibly difficult and painful decision. Bernard told me why he took up such a terrible job so soon after the war ended. He roared over the empty air because protecting those inside meant protecting everyone else out there, and suddenly that burden pressed down on Roja's shoulders until he stopped speaking. As his followers stare at him, the crushing weight of the situation slowly sinks into their minds. Just then, Constanza reported that the barrier magic circle was already set up for activation. Ro's hand shoots out and stops the dying medics in a frantic, desperate scream. He stubbornly insists Bernard's reasoning holds up, even when the man refuses to move a single step. He's shouting something out loud, and right now, like the very first thing anyone says in battle, just as Bernard is supposed to do, I'm going to be the one who actually does it. Bernard listened quietly, knowing clearly now that this isn't going to work out in the end. Roj slammed his hand over his face, shouting about how he couldn't just watch the chaos while he was trapped inside. He decides to show everyone how special he truly is by making a small, desperate request for 10 minutes. The doctor's calm resolve suddenly feels shaky while looking at the sage's heartbreaking words. Lillian rushes forward, loudly joining in her desperate plea with a sharp, urgent accent that fills the room. She insisted that her master had cured countless impossible illnesses long ago. Bernard slammed his fist, shouting that it wasn't a sickness at all. It was an infectious pestilence going everywhere. But Lillian remembered a strange spell from the dusty old book that might have saved her master's soul. The doctor stares in shock as the mysterious woman proposes an ancient spell to save her dying patient. A young lad explains that making the impossible might sound like a lost art, but he claims it can actually recreate complex tech in real life. Lillian said, "Well, I'm not sure yet, but I know Roj can handle it." A determined woman stares at the door, insisting that this isn't just a random chance. She has to take it. As another group of doctors steps forward and asks Bernard to think again, they want us all to care about our village. Bernard's trembling hand and cold resolve finally begin. The subordinate glares at him with a desperate plea that says, "Don't leave." He pulls back from Roj's desperate question and tries to hold back his own fear before the darkness closes in. Lillian and the boy felt so proud as they lifted their heavy things up, knowing that their trust in their master never truly got any harder to believe. As the other doctors stare at their leader, their spirits are lifted and renewed once more by the sage's words. Bernard feels completely unsure whether that plan will succeed, and all his doubts are weighing him down in his throat. Roj's voice filled the room as he roared, shouting hard to stop the madness and refuse to let anyone take over. Bernard's firm conviction moved him past the doubt, and he finally dropped the line, ready to tackle every challenge along the way. You have been given 10 minutes before he lets go. The little girl Lillian and her brother Leo burst out celebrating a tiny win, while their dad Bernard stayed close behind them, whispering sternly that they couldn't let them get too late. Roj dives into battle with no time to lose and throws his ancient power in, letting go completely without needing to worry about anything. He feels a shimmering golden glow surrounding his body as he draws power from the forgotten magic that has been kept hidden for millennia. As Bernard watches, his heart races from seeing how fiercely the wall holds its own. The spell kicks in right then and there, forcing Raj to sprint forward while his doctor leads the way through the deadly city of plague. Lillian tried to run after him, but then the man at the door yelled, "Stay here and watch out for me." Constanze looks at her leader with worry in her eyes as she sits down to watch the operation. The lad boy instantly checks that his squad is all in lockstep and grabs the magic barrier, standing right there as if something major could happen just by looking up. As Rose and Bernard sprinted into the deserted village, Lillian's worried eyes lingered on the scene, watching them leave in haste. Her hand tightens, and she feels completely helpless in trying to save her master. A little boy steps forward and asks, hoping to find something special for his friend. That once arrogant glance is now filled with serious worry, as if he's seeing something wrong. Lillian stares off into the fading light, letting her thoughts swirl like fog before she decides what to do. A flicker of resolve appears in her eyes before she makes a final choice. Loud Boy rushes over and tells her to help set up the barriers. She looks relieved that he's finally under her command. The doctor told Bernard that all the sick people in the village had finally been brought inside the church. Two men rush through the thick walls of a deadly plague to find their lives hanging in the balance. It was as if Roj had never known such a terrifying thing coming his way. They cover the whole church floor in body and blood, but that's not all. When they look up at the sky, their eyes are full of a deep, sorrowful wonder about the quiet life waiting for them here. The man's eyes twitched as the room filled with black spots, and his own breath hitched painfully under them. A foul smell makes the skin tear and burst like rotten fruit. Bernard admits that his doctors are like old customs who can barely stop a heart attack. Roge leans in closely to get a better look at what the plague is doing. Bernard tried to explain the science, but he couldn't answer his own questions about what was really happening inside a cell. The doctor says the symptoms just don't add up when he realizes something is missing from his patient's notes. Rose stared at the sky, a terrifying horror finally washing over her as she saw something impossible and utterly wrong. He decides to pull the trigger with an old trick that could take over the room, but he knows better and wants to make sure everything checks out before stepping into danger. An ancient wizardly door bursts open, and a mysterious screen instantly scans every heartbeat inside the patient. Bernard gasped as he saw the strange sight in the mirror, his eyes widening with a sudden need for answers about who Roge is now. Roge tells the story of that report being penned by an ancient person who spoke a very strange and difficult language. You know what happened last Tuesday? A group of rogue nanomachines broke through a wall and started eating their own bodies. The scan found out they were the real culprit, but you don't need to worry about them anymore. Just enjoy your usual quiet Tuesday. Bernard screamed in pure panic as he tried to grab a fighting move, completely lost on how to handle this strange and terrifying enemy. Roge slowly lifts his head so the world can finally see through his clear, new eyes. He explains that if it's nanomachines, there's a specific counterspell. With a triumphant smile, he declared with great confidence that they could finally save everyone. Roge focused on a magical command and shouted, "Nano-absorb," sending a powerful burst of bright blue light that washed away the whole church in one swoop. It feels like a powerful spell is trying to pull the energy straight into the village's hearts and souls, pulling them all toward its reach. In a moment of pure shock, Bernard sees the black cloud vanish in a thin air right where his family and friends were dying, like a ghostly hug being ripped away. Rogi gently corrected him, clarifying that she wasn't taking away the miasma itself, but simply keeping the tiny nanomachines working for her. He gives a quick lesson on ancient tech, explaining why these tools were originally designed to help people. It feels like time itself has turned into a chaotic mess of code that never ends. Leanne stood in the rain and stared at the door as a bright light shone through its glass pane, feeling like she was finally seeing her teacher for the first time. She remembered that it wasn't just about how much the world loved her. Everyone actually came over to say thank you for being so good at it all. From the very start, she knew that he was someone special because he had brought such joy to everyone around him. Yet this happiness is still wrapped in a dark memory of her childhood fears about being left behind again, even though today she feels insecure and tries desperately to keep up with his incredible strength. She had never imagined she'd be left behind again. Telling someone to wait doesn't feel like a proof that she's worthless. It just means you're stuck in the moment and can't move on. All she's ever wanted was to stand tall beside him, even though she secretly fears he sees her only as a tiny child watching him grow up. It makes her shudder when he walks away and lets her go alone. She felt like a ghost haunting herself and started shattering under the weight of those bad feelings. Lod, that way of speaking shows you're always ready to be smarter and kinder. Lillian stared hard at the screen, her face cracking into a mix of anger and shock as she saw the message. He gets kicked out of his room because he decided that talking to this idiot was stupid. Little boy jumps into action and demands his revenge against the woman who loved him when he was only a boy. She's been thinking too much lately about what he did to her, so when he finally asks why she won't admit it, she keeps trying to keep her secrets just in case. The air suddenly felt heavy and still as Lillian froze in mid-scream when she realized she had been slapped by her father. She tries to stop stuttering as she begs him to finally tell her about his thoughts. It reminded her of that unforgettable evening when she stood in front of him and loudly recited every detail from her own private diary entries, making sure he heard every single word she said. She actually asked him to memorize the first 2 chapters, so you need to stop and share your thoughts while he keeps reading. Lillian's mind was instantly overwhelmed by a terrifying memory, and her brain suddenly went completely black. The girl falls into a deep, silent silence that feels like the world has ended, believing she can finally say goodbye to everything and everyone else for good. Lad Boy offers his own kind of wisdom that feels sharper and more chaotic than true quiet. But then Stan's voice cuts off sharply as he looks at Constanzi, who stands right behind him with a worried expression. As the doctors looked at him with wide eyes, they watched the dark mist of the village vanish into the night sky. A beautiful swirl of glowing light now hangs over the door, signaling that the sage has arrived. Lillian lets her heart drop and the world suddenly stops. The boy's faith in the sage was so completely validated that he couldn't help but celebrate with all his heart. Lillian looks down at the screen with a hard stare and doesn't seem to care that someone else is celebrating loudly. She gave the smallest, knowing smile that could be imagined and immediately trusted him, because she didn't need any more time to think about it. Just as the bell rang and Roj stepped out of the village clearing, he called out cheerfully to his eager students before leaving. Constanza rushes forward right away, shouting a detailed report about what's happening inside. As Rogue steps forward with an ever-smiling face, he declares that his evil deed has finally been cleared away. Constanzi's team is completely stunned when they hear the breaking news. The whole crowd roared out loud as everyone cheered for that never-ending win, only for Rogue to snap their fingers and pull them back to normal, telling them the villagers desperately still need doctors. Constanza steps up and orders her team to go to the church so they can help Bernard. He asked Raul and LB for help too. The doctor tells a story about how his magic heals everything. Eager and determined, LeBoy accepted the mission as a way to make a real difference. Rogue tells Lillian he's ready to join them when they all rush off, but she smiles back at him as if everything has been set in stone for a moment. The old man finally opened the door, and he saw that everyone was running for their lives because something big wasn't being solved yet. Lillian starts running deeper into the twisted woods when she suddenly hears a loud crash and screams for help. She pauses, feeling a sudden knot of worry in her stomach as she wonders if staying close to the crowd was really the right choice. She admitted, standing in the quiet room, that at this moment she felt more like a heavy weight pressing down on his shoulders. Ro was completely stunned and asked, "Why on earth did anyone ask me?" She hesitated and pressed harder, her voice dropping as she realized he couldn't hear anything real at all. Roach flips his script by claiming he has the power to help him instead of just waiting for someone else to do the heavy lifting. He admits he feels drained after casting those amazing spells one by one. She stood right in front of him like the only person who truly understood his recklessness, offering that one genuine, heartfelt thanks instead of being distracted by what he was doing. Lillian's shock was so deep that her words felt like a physical blow, hitting her harder than any other person ever could have. Roach turned her back toward the crowd and admitted that she was the only one who truly deserved to be thanked for always protecting him from danger. The girl in Lillian felt her cheeks turn a deep pink as she thought to herself, "Why am I making this mistake?" She leaned back against him, realizing with a quiet thrill that she had finally admitted to herself that she loved him so much beyond words, and she wondered if he would ever really feel the same deep feeling for her. The dark woods shook with a crackle as they saw their own quiet moment shattered by that sudden noise. He lets out a roar that shakes the forest, and from his massive grin, a crimson glow flickers in his pupils, while his teeth drop with a wet drip of dark liquid as he turns to face the pack. Lylan jumps into the air with such energy that his massive flame pillar shoots up high and bright. It was a raging swirl of flames that shot out and swallowed the beast whole as she reached for her weapon. The wolf's jagged snarl crackled against the burning walls of the spell as she was thrown back. The fiery beast roars and seizes the spot, leaving only chaos behind. But hey, that's just part of how we deal with these things. The monster's terrible roar rages against a hot cage, yet that very fire starts to die down as it fades into smoke. Lillian rushes to her master and says, "I'm calling to prepare a binding spell, and I need your help." She pulls out a thick steel rope and snaps it like a hook, drawing the corrupted wolf into an invisible web of magic that traps him forever. Oh boy. Roach jumps into action with a spark of determination, clutching his hands as if holding a hidden power that could change everything for the village. The dragon roars as he unleashes a beam of ancient nanoblast to catch the beast's hidden energy. The wolf screams of pain while trying to hold onto a swarm of tiny nanobots that snap out of him like hot ice. It's all about teamwork that makes the dreams come true, so let's get our minds together and move on. Later, back at the church, Roach explained what the capture miasma really was. He reaches out and pulls a small vial into his hand, proving that's what's feeding the nanotech monster now. Bernard took a new test to study it and hoped to stop a second outbreak from happening. He's been told Bernard can never feel useful after making his very first move as a rookie. Suddenly, LB Boy slips into a deep sleep caused by an overwhelming rush of magic. Constanza told him he had given away all his mana before she could even turn a corner. Bernard honored Roach because he gave Little Boy a chance to heal his village. He just smiled and joked about how lucky the little guy was for finally getting his meal. Right on cue, one of the medics announced that the meal was finally ready. Lillian smiled and gently pulled the boy down as he lay unconscious, leaving him with a look of pure delight in his eyes. Roach finally hangs up the phone as he stares at the screen, thinking about how she called him back with such urgency. Just as Bernard hurriedly stepped forward from his hiding spot, he received a critical alert from the royal palace and began to run toward the doors of the castle. The boy looks up to see where the news comes from. King Say's order is being relayed, and he wants to find Sage Roge before things get too much trouble. Bernard tells us that the king has been already asking for Rose's help. The man offered a heartfelt apology for his reckless past, moves before snapping and pulling the ancient elder's neck down with surprising force. He grips the door frame so hard that it hurts, and his eyes are locked on the floor like he can see right through him all along. The whole village seemed destined to collapse under his very belief of its own doom. He watches tears stream down his face as he offers him a heartfelt, desperate thank you. Raj stared at his own face, feeling completely startled and a little shy after seeing that big, scary monster look back so hard its pupils had gone wide shut. As the medic hugs his friend, a familiar face glances back while her heart swells with pride for that wonderful teacher. In the quiet room of the church, the air suddenly fills with new hope as everyone begins to feel refreshed and ready for good news from their leader. Suddenly, Loud Boy steps forward and says loudly that he has found the best way to help them all in this important day. The doctor watched the patient's face as he pointed at a blank, helpless spot in time, while the medicine began to drip from his own hand, leaving him utterly stuck behind it. He laughs as he says, "After I finish eating, I'm ready to share the lessons my master taught me. You can never say no when you're ready." His clear, straightforward speech felt perfectly right for the young doctor sitting beside him. He turned to Ro and Bernard and asked for them, but they gave him only a swift and brutal rejection instead. Bernard snaps at the crowd and says, "Why would I even take that idiot's job?" His friends were stunned when they watched the wealthy man receive such rude treatment. Little boy refuses to back down, and his unwavering determination stands firm. He quoted the sage's very words, insisting that everyone deserves to be heard, including himself. The LB boy laughed and said, "I don't care if I'm just being used as a mana battery." He explains that stepping into the heart of the team lets him follow exactly where his great-great-grandfather taught us to do. He begged desperately, and as he saw Roge staring back, Bernard didn't care about the hope in his eyes. He just told him it wasn't enough to get that specific kind of work done. He tells us exactly how tough our jobs are by showing me how to track my asthma and fighting back against danger. The old man gently snapped his fingers at the young noble, shouting, "Stop looking for those silly handouts and get ready for the real test." The medic's sudden roar broke the silence as Roge watched with a calm, chilling eye from behind his own glass of water. Roge finally spoke so Bernard could hear him tell that Elboy boy had enough of guts. Bernard was so convinced Rogers was going to throw his newest student into a fight, yet Raj just told him gently that he should have given the boy a few chances to figure things out. Roge begged passionately for Bernard to let the little ones see the ropes before they were even on their feet. Lily-Ann watches the exchange, and her face gives no answer for a split second before she finally speaks. To the shock of all, she bowed down with great reverence and added a deep sound to her prayer. She steps forward and tells her friend that she knows when to push him aside for safety, even though he thinks his heart belongs where it truly deserves. A young noble stared wide-eyed, stunned and moved by the unexpected kindness she received. Bernard sighed heavily as he let his worn-out passion fade away and eventually gave up. The loud boy's heart raced with uncontrollable joy. Instead of smiling, he was staring at the air so hard his entire face felt like it was made of pure, unadulterated shock. The other medics teasingly pointed out how the leader's heart is full of passionate people and why they're always on the verge of making a big mistake. The two friends shared a knowing grin that felt like the best news they'd ever received. She caught a quick peek at her master, who shared that quiet moment of triumph with her. Roach couldn't help but chuckle as he watched a chaotic yet heartwarming scene unfold in front of him. Lily-Ann stumbles off the edge of her mind and feels completely alone in that quiet moment. Later that night, Roach settles down to unwind and wonders if his long trip of vacations has finally become his own personal training camp. Lily-Ann's calm mood shatters when a heavy door swings wide into her living room, cutting off any peace she might be holding. Oh, Roach. His brain instantly got stuck mid-thought on how to shut off that strange device, and he's staring at the ground again. Lily-Ann looked instantly flustered, with a sudden surge of nervous sweat racing across her forehead. The girl tried hard to hide the mess she made by pulling a wet towel over her head and whispering, "I'm sorry." She plunges into the cold pool while Roge quietly whispers pleas for a way out before he can reach her. He was left staring at a mirror with wide eyes as he saw his relaxing bath suddenly become the most awkward moment of his entire life. Lillian grabbed a towel and pulled herself tightly against it, trapping both of them inside the dark room until they realized that everything was just a joke played on her clumsy friend. Lillian looked up and said, "You really want me? I'm so tired." Even though Lillian was polite and said no about scrubbing her master's back, the idea still seemed appealing. She stepped back into the crowd and whispered, "Ding dong, ding dong. It's absolutely a headache." Even though her annoyance was strong, she admitted to herself that maybe the fool had a point. She thinks the moment she stops acting, the boy will never stop seeing her as a student. Roach finally broke free of her own thoughts as she stepped forward to face reality. He suddenly pops up from the water and yells, "I'm leaving now." Lillian holds her breath and gently pushes the man away while whispering, "Please look over." Raj screams in panic, desperately clutching his chest as he tries to shut off the whole thing. She asked if the trouble was enough for her to finally get to talk. The sage was still sweating so hard she couldn't figure out why she picked such an embarrassing place to talk to herself. She finds herself asking if someone could talk while soaking in the tub, but she quickly admits that yes, it is actually quite a valid idea to ask someone this way. She smiled up at him with a bright smile and said gently that she'd been waiting for an opportunity to teach LB Boy about Bernard, promising they would have a wonderful time together. Lillian admitted she was feeling helpless and discouraged during the miasma crisis. Yet watching Lil Boy stand firm moved her to realize she couldn't catch up as the first disciple. Roach noted how they had touched each other positively, but he remembered exactly what Lil Boy said about that moment. Lillian nods and says, "You can quote any simple truth that makes sense to you," because she believes everything is fine if it works for her. With a quick blush, she finally admitted she had joined him because he was the one who taught her how to love again. The wise old man fell flat in his chair, his mind racing wildly as he tried to figure out what was happening. He tries to talk calmly to her again, gently reminding her that she has grown up and can handle herself now. The girl pointed proudly at herself, clearly stating that she wasn't a baby who needed someone to take care of her. He keeps trying to wave his arms out while she starts talking about what's really happening inside her head. She was so delighted because she could be her own little sister and her own dear child all at once. She lets out a soft, lingering blush as she finally says the truth. She really likes him. Rose stared wide-eyed at the wall, unable to find any words for how she had felt that evening as she leaned in and kissed him again. But right when that crazy laugh broke the silence, Lil Boy slammed onto the stage and offered a wild talk about how he'd be the ultimate mood killer. Shocked by Lillian's complaint about missing their chance, he stands frozen as if a giant invisible storm has just rolled over his small town. The bucket slammed against his face as he flew through the air, leaving him staring in disbelief at what he had just done to a man who shouldn't be touching him. Roach scrambles to avoid getting caught by Lillian, who looks horrified as he pushes the door open and yells for her to wait. He feels his smoothness fading, realizing the world is too fast now. Lillian walked into a quiet room alone. Her words had already finished telling the story before anyone could hear them, leaving only silence to fill the air. She's completely covered in that kind of red, which makes her look so shy and a bit worried about everything happening next. Roach is clutching his head in a fit of despair as Boy sleeps peacefully on the floor below. As the sun rose bright and new, a young boy named Boy stood up and shouted a loud, passionate goodbye to his family's medical team before he could say anything else. He turns back with a smile, handing his friend the last words he has been speaking for them. So the guy tells them where they're going and warns them that Zabel has a special way of making things hate magic. Lillianette just smiled over her shoulder, treating this moment like a fresh chapter in an exciting book she was ready to write. Roach asked Bernard to help with his kid, but the doctor said he had to decide for himself. Lillian stops walking and shouts a final, sharp warning to Lode Boy before running off with him. Lillian rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, Roach, you're crying about how lonely this new life feels." Her icy, hard stare made Sage drop his wand and freeze in silence for a long moment. He bounced forward fast, telling the crowd, "I wasn't actually making fun of them at all." She softens as she admits to missing her very first junior disciple only a little. Roach finally understood why everyone else had been complaining. It wasn't her fault at all. As she walked, she said she didn't want the master to worry about her. The story jumps back to that happy childhood day when the little boy showed off his magic and everyone was really proud of him. Doesn't that look like an exciting moment to him? The roaring crowd hails for the new emperor, Kielius, yet his icy gaze offers no signs of genuine joy. The ambulance driver tries to get the driver's info from the driver, but Sialius says bury the car instead. A terrified man rushes to block the king's path as his fears of witnesses and reports reach him, while a fresh emperor steps forward, promising to keep every secret hidden from anyone who questions him. Lord Treen walks out of the shadows and lands directly before the emperor's throne, where everyone waits in stunned silence. In that grand library, Lady Isabel had been summoned to do her usual job of cleaning and fixing things. The team members are trying to figure out why this work is so critical for them. Even though she knows why people work hard for a living, she's definitely mad they're doing this day-to-day job like that. She snapped her head at the idea of doing this work as a junior officer, because that's exactly what she once did when she was in charge. The subordinate told the boss he knows exactly how to make magic work perfectly for a grand show. Isabel snapped and laughed off the job she was assigned, treating it as a dull chore on her desk. She decided to end the fight, so she prepared her spellbook to cast a wave of complex magical circles around them. But the water poured in and confused everything at once. It took a whole new world to make her utterly frozen in silence after the sheer scale and complexity of the task left her completely stunned. She wonders how long she'd spent alone with a giant monster and wonders what Lillian says about that record. The answer was a humbling list of Lillian's impossible efficiency. Her subordinates can't help but praise Lillian for that truly amazing, uncharacteristic talent they just witnessed. Isabel's stubborn sense of self might actually make her demand that everyone else stop talking immediately. I tell her that if she's thinking about efficiency, it means I've been cutting corners for her. She argued loudly because every task she was handed had made proper maintenance completely impossible to do. She lets out a dramatic sigh and finally says, "I'm done," feeling like I've proven myself stronger than anyone else all along. Her team never lets her off the hook. Instead of any real words, they trade a lazy, flat stare that says nothing but, "We're just hanging out." Lord Treson sits comfortably in the warm sunlight of his conservatory, savoring this peaceful pause before the day begins. The Emperor Kalia steps forward and offers a barely warm greeting to his guest. Tristan takes a long, slow sip of his tea, while quietly wondering why the Emperor speaks so sharply about their next move. Keys wondered how he wouldn't have teleported, yet Trine insisted his grand adventure required a master like Lillian to do it right. Trishan's quiet resignation was matched by a loud, official confirmation that she had actually been sick. Trishan finally asked Isabel out for a job, and the other girl offered nothing more than quiet. The Emperor turns his head and shrugs like a man who knows the truth. Yet that quick look reveals exactly why he's been so careful all along. Trishan staring blankly at his brother looks like a cold realization that he truly knows the truth behind everything. He shifted his attention to Tyala, shouting that she had been called specifically for something. Tram was staring blankly at his dead father, and Kalia shouted, "Where are we going now?" "Shoo." Trishan says his dad won't be able to see him this time. After his mother passed away, the man finally learned to speak with all his heart and soul, for no one else could understand him anymore. As the Emperor stared at his reflection, his expression twisted in pain and sorrow, heavy with every bad memory that had weighed down him all along. Trishan felt a heavy heart as he watched his rival get picked to be their new king because he had always been the last one left. Tyala's eyes widen in fury as she shouts that her father must leave right now. Trishan steps back to let his father finally close his eyes and enjoy that peace as he sits beside Kaliaz on the throne. He's going to put his heart into helping the new ruler who hides behind dark corners. Sialius was so angry he couldn't stand being told that his brother shouldn't be making fun of him, so he demanded they stop. Trishan smiled warmly, reminding himself that being royalty meant he could never run out of strength. He adds a harsh comment about not understanding someone else's suffering while he watches the Emperor miss something important in life. The teacher insists that he needs a clear answer, but the student simply invites him to step back and look at the world differently. The Emperor didn't just explode. He shattered in an instant, and suddenly he looked so angry that he couldn't hold back his anger any longer. The heavy weight of the crown presses into his chest as he grips his fist tight to hold everything up. He revealed that his parents desperately wanted to save Tristan from the chaotic and corrupt political world surrounding them. Trian was a man with so much talent that he could have lived out of existence if only they let him explore every corner of his world without any restrictions. The old sealkeeper found himself staring at the page when his mother suddenly praised his clever trick, but immediately dismissed it as a silly idea that would never help him advance in royalty. Trishan declared his extraordinary gift and made that decision even for himself and his own dad. The giant pointed sharply at Tyala, showing her he could run away with his own magical powers instead of staying bound by the king's rule.